Yeah, and I know you've had issues for about a week with the App Store. I don't know, by the time we release this episode, I'm sure they'll be all resolved. But maybe if you want to talk briefly about the situation with the WordPress app and kind of like what was the big issue and kind of just where things stand.
Well, I think the interesting thing with WordPress being open source, the platform of WordPress is not in any one server. It doesn't belong to one company. WordPress.com is a commercial hosting instance of it. Matt Mullenweg, who created WordPress, decided to create a for-profit company to host WordPress in the cloud, so you don't have to worry about anything. So the mobile apps, while most of the contributors are Automattic employees, the code is part of the WordPress Foundation.
And we're talking about like the server code that's like PHP essentially.
Right. So the server code is, but also the mobile app code. So all of the iOS and Android code is also part of the WordPress Foundation. Automattic is specifically licensed to be able to release that code as an app in the App Store. So if you look at the WordPress app, it does show under the Automattic store. That's because we are the only licensed in a GPL. There's a lot of nuance there with releasing apps in the App Store. So the thing is, like, Apple wants us to have in-app purchase if there's any type of sign-up process, and there's plans that can be paid. But the nature of how WordPress works is that WordPress.com is like one of the platforms, one of the hosting providers that you can choose. And we've accidentally let some of that plan information sort of leak through because there's always links to, if you're familiar with WordPress, the WP admin page is where you go to manage everything. And there's stuff on there that's from WordPress.com. If you're hosted with GoDaddy, there's probably GoDaddy information in there.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Inevitably, it leaks through somewhere. And unfortunately, we all know that the App Store review process is subjective to the person that is doing the review. And we've all heard stories about how their appeal process doesn't exactly help in every case. So I think in this case, someone finally understood the WordPress platform and that it's open source. And hopefully it's resolved for good, but we'll see,
Yeah, it's always difficult to deal with those kind of situations, it seems like.
It is. And to be honest, like, we've wanted to put in-app purchase in the app for a very long time, but it's kind of a, crappy thing to do, to put for-profit code for one of the hosting providers in the app and then just sort of let everybody else not be able to make money through the app. So we've tried to think through some way of actually continuing to do in-app purchase. Maybe we'll come up with something. But there's a lot of accounting work and legalities and refunds and all that to have to work through that has made it just sort of an impossible thing to do.
Yeah. Thank you so much for explaining the situation. That was my understanding as well, was the fact that like there's a web view essentially with the information for WordPress.com, and it's kind of, it seems like Apple misinterpreted that in some ways. So it looks like that is getting closer and closer to being resolved essentially.
Yep. And it's the nice thing is, like, with the WooCommerce app that I'm working on, that is clearly commercial. And if we want to do an app purchase, like, we have less barriers there. So I'm looking forward to at least making Apple some money because, we're using their platform to ship our apps. So I'd like to be able to do it just to say that I've done it as well.
Yeah. I'm always interested, just as a side conversation, like, I'm always interested in building open source apps. What are like some of the gotchas about putting an app in the App Store while, letting your code be public, besides the inevitable cloning of your app and republishing
right
it?
So there's a lot of, just from the logistics standpoint of distributing the app, there's a lot of like secrets that you can't leak out. You want to have contributors to be able to compile the code, and uniquely with iOS, there's a lot of code signing issues. If it's a simple app, you can easily not put the code signing information in there and someone can manage. But if you start to have extensions and watch apps and things that really rely on the portal setup for the app, it's really hard to get contributors to get everything working to be able to contribute to all the pieces of the app. The other thing too is that you have to license your code in a way that you feel like is the most appropriate. We try to follow the WordPress Foundation's standard of GPL v2, which makes the app itself sort of hard to repackage and distribute as something as your own. But we've been shifting over the last few years to making libraries. And if you have any experience with WordPress, you may have heard of Gutenberg, which is the new block editor.
Oh, yeah.
We are actually going to be relicensing that as, I believe, Mozilla license, so that you can actually incorporate that library in your app, and you aren't forced to also open source the app that it's enclosed into. Whereas with GPL, you take one of our libraries and you have to open source your code as well.
Right. Are there like any good licenses if you want to build an app that you want to open source and make available?
I think if I weren't working for Automattic and I was just creating something on my own, I'd probably look at MIT for a library that is. That's like one of the most open and very clear ways of licensing the code. I do like GPL. I think that there is something to be said about if you are spending a lot of time on something and you want people to contribute back, or at least to pass it on to the people that are using their thing. It doesn't necessarily make sense for the App Store, but the Mozilla license and Apache are also good, but I know GPL and Apache aren't fully compatible as well. So licensing is insane how complex it is. And even with having a team of lawyers that are really great with open source licensing concerns, it's still confusing.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's something I'm looking into. I have a couple of apps that I'd like to just let the code be available so people can look at. So there's some stuff that I just, copyright it and keep it closed. But some stuff that I'm intending on letting people see the code, even though the app is in the App Store. So this is definitely something I've chewed about quite a bit and tried to figure out.
And Ray Wenderlich is also open sourcing some of the code that they're working on for the Ray Wenderlich app that'll be coming out or has come out. He's also working through a lot of those things with the team, with the benefits of sharing the code that powers this thing that you're used to. And WordPress is huge. It takes a long time to compile. It's a big app, and not everybody has the opportunity of seeing such a large app in the clear to see how it can be done. And
the only other app that I can think of that's similar to that would be Wikipedia, which is essentially like open source and you can see everything. So yeah, it's a real benefit to the community.
We worked with the Wikipedia team as well on licensing and all that fun stuff. So we've had conversations with them too.